Yo, how's it going everybody? You got Sketch here and welcome back to the channel. And on today's episode we're taking a look at the newest entry to the Halo series, Halo Infinite, developed by 343 Studios and published by Microsoft in December of 2021. This got held up in a bit of development delay, but now that it's been out for a little while and I've run the campaign and played a healthy amount of the multiplayer, let's discuss what's good and see if this release is worth jumping back into the role of Master Chief after its predecessor, Halo 5. Luckily, it's safe to report that the Chief's return is a welcome one, and coupled with its multiplayer is a decent package with a few flaws which we'll get into later on in this video. In the meantime, let's fire up the Warthog and catch up on the story so far. In the year 2959, UNSC Craft Infinity is ransacked by a newly emerged threat known as the Banished. Amidst the chaos, a sizable chunk of the Zeta Halo is destroyed, and the Chief is outmatched by his newest foe, Atriox. Master Chief is then yeeted into the vacuum of space to lay dormant for 6 months until a rogue pilot discovers him floating in the abyss. Once he is recovered and recharged, he sets out to continue the fight and bring down this new threat before any further damage is done. Gameplay-wise, you've got a first-person shooter in typical Halo fare with several additions to the core gameplay loop we've seen in past entries of the franchise. You'll run through a handful of story missions that to an extent start out linear, then branch out into an open world where you can choose your path, letting you access more of the map as you complete various objectives. Yes, Halo Infinite has followed suit with current day shooters, and yes, it's in a low-key open world setting that has a familiar feel to something like the recent entries of Far Cry, even down to the types of objectives. However, this really isn't a bad thing considering the options it offers to let you go about the campaign as you wish. Gameplay itself is a bit faster than past Halo games, and the speed of this iteration is noticeable. Once you start finding upgrades to your weapons and extra perks around the map, you can make the Chief a straight up killing machine with some pretty slick gear like the thruster, deployable threat sensor, shield core, and the grappling hook. The grappling hook was pretty fun to use and you can do some pretty ridiculous stuff with it in the campaign and multiplayer. This, of all the upgrades, I found myself using this one the most once it was maxed out. Since the upgrades are now tiered, getting items to level 5 made them extremely powerful, so maxing out items is encouraged even if it's not necessarily required. While the loop is different from past entries, once it all gets going, it has a very familiar feel. The gunplay and more agile movement pair up well here and drives a charge of action as you battle across and liberate Zeta Halo. You'll see a few familiar enemies from past entries and even buff versions of them scattered around the map as lieutenants, along with a few new enemy types that can and will layeth the smack it down until you figure out their attacks. This, coupled with the open world structure, gives you the options to either just blast through the main story missions or do the side quests, of which there's a good bit of. There's also a bevy of hidden items around the map like the Spartan cores and armor upgrades, along with audio logs that bring you up to speed as to what's happened between Halo 5 and this current entry. So finding these does add a lot of lore, considering otherwise a fair amount of context is left out. The staple skull collectibles also return and also scattered around the map and in the main story missions. Completing side objectives such as taking over bases will open fast travel locations around the map as well as offer vehicle and weapon upgrade variants. These at first don't seem too different from the base weapons, but the more of them you unlock and take into the story missions definitely stack up the odds in your favor. The battle rifle and commando variants slap particularly hard, as well as the launcher variants which lay down some serious firepower. Graphics wise, this game does look stunning at times. While not quite everything is exactly mind-blowing, there's still some downright gorgeous visuals seen in Halo Infinite. This entry utilizes the Slipspace engine, which initially was a component of what caused delays during the game's development, but once the scope was set and the players were in place that were familiar with the development tools, things definitely came together compared to what was shown initially in 2020. The extra development time was a good call to make here, and it definitely shows in almost every detail. Environments also look pretty good here, and you'll see a variety of locales you'd expect to see in a Halo title, and you'll get a few surprises along the way. There's a lot of ground to explore, and the sites around you are pretty lush and detailed, though don't spend too much time getting lost in the scenery since the Banished can and will body you as you marvel the landscapes if you aren't careful. Cutscenes also look very good here, and it's also cool to see something on Xbox that actually looks kind of next gen. Character models got some nice visual detail here, and even though a couple facial animations on characters look a little wonky, it's overall pretty solid. Enemy and boss characters also look pretty sick here as you battle through Zeta Halo. The main and sub bosses you'll encounter all look pretty dope, and again you'll see some similar enemy types from past games, and the new additions to the enemy roster toss some formidable foes at you. The boss characters especially have some really cool designs, though if your encounter is over leveled, you definitely won't see them for very long before you swiftly defeat them. Several of the staple vehicles and weapons make their return along with a handful of new ones, but also with a handful of emissions granted, though for the most part everything you'd expect to see is there. Well, mostly. As far as emissions, there's actually still a few glaring ones that we'll get into towards the end of this video, but for all intents and purposes, most of what you expect to see here is present. Sound wise, again, this is about what you would expect, and the Foley art here for the sound effects is mostly cooking. Gunfire and explosions got a good bit of weight to them, and the impact of that last bullet piercing your ops is pretty dang satisfying. There's a lot of way to make things go boom as you traverse Zeta Halo, and for the most part, it all sounds pretty good. In-game music still has those epic tunes you'd expect to hear even in the absence of Halo's longtime composer. This effort was handled by a team of composers consisting of Gareth Coker, Joel Korolitz, Curtis Schweitzer, and Alex Bohr, and they managed to pull off some solid scores during the game's campaign along with a few crescendo and climax tunes while the action cools off a bit. Voice acting, of which there is a lot of here, is delivered fairly well, even though you will hear some very familiar tropes and catchphrases throughout the game game along with a few nostalgia nods to past entries in the franchise. The voice acting will go through a series of emotions as you pummel the Banished, and is certainly amongst the better end of the voice work since 343 Studios took the lead of the series. So for what's on offer here, it's really not bad at all. So let's talk more about that multiplayer before getting too far ahead, since this released before the campaign last December. This is the first time in a Halo title in which the multiplayer client is free to play, but unfortunately this came with all the problems that some free to play games have, mainly being a lack of content. While Halo Infinite was in beta with its multiplayer suite, it lacked the ability to pick what game mode you wanted to play, which is an understandable thing with it being in beta and all. Though come release day, it was the same deal. Your progression stayed, but no new content had arrived on launch day with the campaign, which was a bit of a letdown. The biggest gripe with the multiplayer, however, is the progression system itself and its flood of microtransactions, locking majority of the cool stuff behind a paywall with not one, but 2 battle passes. It's a long duration pass, but still there hasn't been any new content to speak of besides cosmetics and a couple of rotating game modes. While there is still a fair amount on offer, a lot of the modes one would expect to see in a Halo game are absent or either stuck behind quick playlists that randomizes the more comp-oriented game types, which also makes certain challenges a bit more cumbersome to try to complete. Though the biggest offender here is the actual progression rate itself. There's people that have hit max level 100 on the main pass and 20 plus on the premium pass, but it takes a while to hit those numbers with regular play. Unless you're checking out challenges, you get seemingly no XP for just playing the game, which really doesn't make too much sense. 343 has tuned the progression rate since launch, but it still feels a bit stilted currently, and the fact that Slayer wasn't available at launch was also a concern, but hey, at least it's there now. Though the question is, why is so much either temporarily locked or possibly not coming in the game that's known for having a lot of game modes to play? The other glaring omission is that of the Forge map creation system as well as co-op campaign play, both of which are slated to come in the next season update, which is still several months from now. The issue with these not being available at all currently was a deal breaker for many that were interested in this title, though 343 claims it's coming, so hopefully that is still on track to release soon. The absence of co-op was a major issue when it was announced, but coupled with Forge also being missing at launch was equally as large of an issue. Once these features are available, it will certainly add on to an overall package, giving players much more to do once finishing the campaign, which at the moment is still the highlight. The multiplayer is good too, but it's got some issues that once ironed out will make it an awesome multiplayer experience. Overall, Halo Infinite was a solid first-person shooter experience, even in spite of its glaring omissions and curious choices with its multiplayer and campaign scope. All of it together was a fairly strong entry in the franchise, and as far as the 343 series goes, this is their best work so far, I'd say. The action set pieces you'll see will call back to previous games, and it's even got some low-key callbacks to Halo 3, which was a nice reminder of how far the series has come. Hopefully future content and just a few more tweaks to certain aspects will fill in the gaps and make this an even more solid title. Halo Infinite gets an 8 out of 10 and comes recommended to FPS fans and fans of the Halo series, considering there's a bit of something here for everybody. Even for what's not available yet, there's still a good amount of things to do that will keep you busy for a while, and the gameplay is a lot of fun. Though once you've hit the end game, results at the moment may vary until additional content releases. For the time being, this is not a bad place to hunker down by any means. And if you made it this far in the video, thank you very much for checking this out. If you find this video helpful, that's awesome. Glad you can use it as a resource. Check back often, we'll have more reviews and commentaries and all that good stuff coming in the near future. But until then, take it easy and stay safe out there. I'll see you on the next one.